The bank froze. My sister, the vice president, dropped to her knees right there on the marble floor. All because I decided to withdraw $3.5 billion just moments after she'd laughed in my face for asking for 100. Everyone who knows me thinks I'm just a quiet woman who lives in the woods. They have no idea who I really am. Let me ask you, what's the true price of being betrayed by your own family? My name is Kaya, and you're going to want to hear what happened next. It's funny the moments that end up defining you. They're never the big cinematic ones you expect. They don't arrive with a swell of orchestral music or a dramatic zoom. Sometimes they arrive on a Tuesday afternoon on the 47th floor of a steel and glass tower in Denver, Colorado, smelling of ozone and expensive leather. And sometimes a life pivots on the weight of a single $100 bill. Before I walked into that building, that monument to other people's money. My phone buzzed with a picture message. It was from Mateo. The photo showed a patch of wilting kale, the leaves tragically limp. Below it, a text. The pump finally gave up the ghost. It's a goner. We're so close, Kaya. But the repair guy won't come out for less than 300. We've only got 2. I could feel the ache in his words. Mateo ran the 5 Points Community Garden, a small patch of improbable green defiance, in a neighborhood forgotten by the city's gleam. He poured his soul into that soil, coaxing life from dirt that everyone else had written off. We'd met a few months prior when I was in town visiting, and I'd spent a week volunteering. My hands plunged into the cool earth, feeling more at home there than I ever had in my family's Boston townhome. His passion was a mirror to my own. I texted back, "Don't worry, I'll handle the last 100. He'll be there this afternoon." He replied almost instantly, "You're a miracle." A miracle. I held the phone in my hand, the word feeling strange and ill-fitting. No, I wasn't a miracle. I was just a woman in a worn-in flannel shirt and faded jeans about to walk into the lion's den to ask my older sister Serafina Sterling for a loan. Pioneer Heritage Bank and Trust wasn't just a building, it was a statement. It soared into the crisp, high-altitude autumn sky, reflecting the jagged peaks of the Rockies in its cold, indifferent glass. Walking into the lobby felt like entering a cathedral built to worship commerce. The air was chilled, filtered silent, except for the hushed reverence of employee voices and the whisper of expensive shoes on Italian marble. Everything was designed to make you feel small, insignificant. I felt the familiar weight of my own otherness, the worn leather of my boots, a stark contrast to the polished perfection all around me. A severe-looking woman at the reception desk looked up, her expression a carefully constructed wall of professional boredom. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone implying that she doubted it. "I'm here to see Serafina Sterling," I said, my voice sounding too soft in the cavernous space. "I'm her sister Kaya." The woman's eyebrows flickered a micro-expression of disbelief before she tapped at her keyboard. "Miss Sterling is very busy. Do you have an appointment?" "No," I admitted, "but if you could just tell her I'm here, it will only take a moment." She seemed to weigh the possibility of my immediate ejection before sighing a sound of profound inconvenience. One moment. A few minutes later, a young man with a nervous face and a suit that looked a size too big for him came to collect me. "Miss Sterling, right this way," he said, avoiding my eyes as he led me to a private elevator. Serafina's office was less a workspace and more a declaration of victory. It was a corner office on the top floor, with a panoramic view of the mountains that stretched from horizon to horizon. It was the kind of view people spend their lives chasing, a vista of sublime, untamed beauty. But from inside this sterile, minimalist box of white leather and chrome, it looked like a screensaver, owned but never truly felt. And then I saw her. Serafina Sterling, my sister. She was standing by the window, her back to me, a phone pressed to her ear. She was immaculate, a sculpture carved from ambition. Her dark hair was pulled into a severe, elegant chignon, and her suit, a sharp, minimalist charcoal gray, probably cost more than my truck. She ended her call and turned her eyes sweeping over me. There was no warmth, no surprise, just a faint clinical curiosity. Kaya, she said, her voice smooth and cool as the glass behind her. What a surprise. To what do I owe the pleasure? Did your kombucha brewery finally go under? The young associate, whose name I learned was Connor, shifted his weight uncomfortably by the door. Hello, Sarah, I said, forcing a small smile. No, everything's fine. I needed to ask you for a favor. She gestured to one of the two severe-looking chairs opposite her massive desk. A favor? She repeated the words, tasting like an unpleasant medicine in her mouth. She sat down, crossing her legs, the picture of bored authority. Go on? Connor, stay. You might learn something about alternative asset management. The jab was for me, but the command was for him. Connor looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. I took a breath, the filtered air tasting of nothing. It's not for me, I began, and calmly explained the situation with Mateo's garden, the broken pump, the wilting vegetables, the community that depended on them. I emphasized that it was a simple loan that I could pay her back by Friday, as soon as I got back to Oregon. It's just $100. I finished the amount, sounding ridiculous in this temple of billions. Sarah listened, her head tilted slightly, a faint, cruel smile playing on her lips. It was the look of a surgeon examining a particularly uninteresting specimen. When I was done, she leaned back in her chair, the leather sighing softly. A community garden, she said, drawing the words out. How quaint. Kaya, honestly. I have a portfolio worth 9 figures under my direct management. I am in the middle of closing a deal with a Swiss consortium, and you are here in my office talking about a broken water pump and kale. She looked at Connor. You see Connor financial responsibility. It's a concept. Some people build diversified portfolios, others build charity pits, and then wonder why they're always struggling. She turned her gaze back to me, and her voice lost its mocking lightness, hardening into something sharp and cold. I have spent 15 years building a reputation in this city, a reputation for excellence, for success, for understanding how the world actually works. My life in Boston, our family's misfortunes, I have overcome all of that. The mention of our family's past hung in the air, a ghost she had summoned just to prove she was no longer haunted by it. And you, she continued, her eyes raking over my flannel shirt, my worn jeans, my messy braid. You run off to Oregon to live in some sad little experiment, in dirt-worshipping, completely abdicating any sense of responsibility, and you have the audacity to walk in here and ask me to finance it? The hurt was there, a familiar, dull ache behind my ribs. But something else was rising alongside it, a feeling of immense, chilling clarity. I didn't speak. I just watched her. She seemed to take my silence as acquiescence as defeat. She stood up, smoothing the front of her suit jacket, the final dismissal. Kaya, darling, she said, her voice dripping with a final theatrical note of pity. This is a place for people who build wealth, not for people who ask for handouts to play in the mud. I simply cannot have my professional reputation associated with this. She gestured vaguely at me at everything I was. We don't handle accounts of this magnitude. The last word was a poisoned dart, delivered with a perfect venomous smile. I saw Connor flinch. He physically recoiled, his eyes fixed on the floor, his face burning with a shame that wasn't his. And in that moment, the old ache in my chest didn't flare. It solidified. It turned into something cold, hard, and immovably calm. The final thread of hope I'd held onto for us, a thin, frayed thing I hadn't even realized was still there, snapped. Cleanly, irrevocably. I stood up slowly. My body felt light. You're right, I said, my voice even. Thank you for your time, Serafina. I turned and walked out of the office past the mortified junior associate and didn't look back. I rode the silent elevator down 47 floors, walked through the marble sanctuary, and pushed through the heavy glass doors into the bright, cold Denver air. The noise of the city traffic seemed distant, muted. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, the sun on my face. A miracle. That's what Mateo had called me, but he was wrong. My sister was the one who had just performed the miracle. She didn't refuse me $100. She confirmed that to her, I was worth nothing at all, and in doing so, she handed me the justification I never knew I needed. The flight from Denver back to Portland was a study in controlled decompression. As the plane descended through the thick gray blanket of Oregon clouds, I felt the sharp, brittle tension of the city begin to dissolve from my bones. Leaving the high, dry altitude of Colorado for the damp, heavy air of the Pacific Northwest was like plunging my soul into a cool bath. The air here smelled of life, of pine and wet earth and impending rain. It was the scent of home. My truck was waiting for me in the economy lot, a familiar, mud-splattered beast of burden. The drive home away from the city and deeper into the coastal range was a journey back to myself. The farther I drove, the denser the trees became, their massive trunks swallowing the highway, until finally I turned onto the unmarked gravel road that led to my property, to my fortress. My home isn't grand. It's a small, sturdy cabin I built myself, with a deep porch and solar panels glinting on the roof. It's surrounded by 80 acres of forest I've placed in a conservation trust. My nearest neighbor is 3 miles away. A plume of smoke was rising from the chimney, a thoughtful gesture from my friend Ben, who checks on the place when I'm gone. As I pulled to a stop, a furry black and white missile of pure joy came bounding out to meet me. Bolo, I laughed, kneeling down as my border collie leaped into my arms, his tail thumping a frantic rhythm against my back. Here there was no judgment, only the uncomplicated absolute loyalty of a good dog. Inside the cabin was warm, filled with the scent of cedar and wood smoke. This place, my sanctuary, my laboratory, was the complete antithesis of Serafina's glass tower. Her world was built on abstraction, on numbers on a screen, and the perception of power. Mine was built on the tangible, the warmth from the wood stove, the water from my well, the food from my garden. Every system here was interconnected, a closed loop of sustainability I had designed and nurtured. It was real. It was mine. After unpacking, I went to my workshop, a converted barn a short walk from the cabin. This was my heart's true home. Tools lined the walls in perfect order. Prototypes of atmospheric water harvesters and soil remediation devices sat on benches, and in the corner on a small dusty shelf sat a single silver-framed photograph. Me and Sarah, aged 10 and 12, grinning with our father Declan, his arm around both of us. His eyes in the photo were so full of life and pride. Looking at it now after the encounter in Denver felt like pressing on a bruise. The memory it triggered wasn't of this happy moment, but of the storm that came years later, a storm that wrecked us all. I was 17. The memory came back in sharp, painful flashes. My father, a brilliant, kind, but hopelessly trusting civil engineer, sitting at our dining room table in Boston. Across from him sat Julian, Serafina's new fiancé. Julian was slick handsome, with a predator's smile, and a vocabulary full of words like synergy and disruption. He was selling my father on a dream, a speculative tech startup that was going to revolutionize the data sphere. My father, who understood bridges and stress tolerances and the immutable laws of physics, was utterly lost in Julian's world of abstract, can't-miss ventures. I remember my father looking at my mother, his eyes shining. "Eleanor," he had said, "this is it. This is the chance to build something for the girls. Real security." Sarah, already so different from me, so eager to climb, had looked at Julian with pure adoration. She had seen him as her ticket out of our comfortable, but in her eyes, unremarkable suburban life. The crash was absolute. The startup was a ghost, a shell company that vanished overnight, taking my parents' entire life savings with it. Their retirement, their home, their future gone. The shouting matches started then. My father's heartbroken confusion, my mother's terrified whispered accusations. Then came the silence, which was so much worse. The shame was a thick, choking fog in our small rental apartment. The moving boxes were a constant grim reminder of everything we had lost. But the true schism, the moment the crack in our family became an unbridgeable chasm, was when Sarah and Julian came to visit. They didn't come to comfort. They came to judge. I can still see Sarah standing in the cramped living room, looking around with disdain, her new designer handbag clutched in her hand. My father tried to explain, to apologize, his voice trembling. Sarah had cut him off. "Honestly, Dad," she'd said, her voice sharp with a cruelty I'd never heard before, "Julian gave you a golden opportunity, and you hesitated. You didn't have the ambition to see it through. Some people know how to make money, and some people don't. She chose him. She chose the man who ruined us, over everything. It was in the ruins of that life that my own secret life began. While my family disintegrated into blame and bitterness, I retreated. I locked myself in my room, not with tears, but with textbooks. I found solace in the elegant certainty of chemistry and physics. If the human world was chaotic and cruel, the natural world was a system of perfect logical rules, and it was there, fueled by a quiet, desperate rage, that I started working on a solution. Not for my family's finances, but for something more fundamental: water. I developed a filtration system. It wasn't flashy. It was a simple, elegant process using activated biochar from agricultural waste and a unique microporous ceramic I synthesized myself. It could remove heavy metals, pathogens, and chemical contaminants from water with over 99% efficiency. It was cheap, scalable, and required no external power. It was my answer to the world's toxicity. It was my quiet act of rebellion. Back in my workshop, the cold Oregon air seeping through the old barn walls, the memory settled not as pain but as fuel. The hard, calm clarity from Denver was still there. It had a name now. It was purpose. I walked over to a locked steel cabinet and opened it. Inside, nestled in a foam case, was a single rugged satellite phone, an anonymous, untraceable link to the other half of my life. I powered it on. The screen flickered to life, connecting to a network that had no interest in borders or jurisdictions. I dialed a number in Boston, a number I knew by heart. It rang twice before a voice answered a voice that was as familiar and comforting as the smell of old books and pipe tobacco. It was warm, sharp, and utterly steady. "Kaya, my dear," he said. "Hello, Elias," I replied. "Elias Vance." He had been my father's lawyer, his friend before the fall. He saw Julian for the charlatan he was from day one, and had been unceremoniously dismissed. When I had my breakthrough with the filter, he was the only person I trusted. He helped me navigate the labyrinth of patent law, setting up a shell corporation to hold the intellectual property, and creating the Ethelgard Trust to manage the royalties that soon began to flow in from governments and NGOs across the globe. He built the fortress walls that kept me safe, that kept me anonymous. I recounted the incident with Sarah, my voice low and steady, detailing her words with the precision of a scientist recording data. Elias listened patiently, without interruption. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. "Well," he finally said, his voice laced with a weary sadness, "I am many things, my dear, but surprised is not one of them. Your sister has been drinking her husband's Kool-Aid for a very long time." He paused again, and when he spoke next, his voice was filled with a fierce affection that warmed me to my core. "The world thinks you are a hermit, Kaya. It does not know you are a queen in your own kingdom. A queen." The word felt as strange as miracle. "What do you wish to do?" he asked gently. I turned and looked out the workshop window, past the rain-slicked prototypes, and into the deep dark green of the forest I had sworn to protect. This was my kingdom. This was what was real. Sarah works for Pioneer Heritage Bank and Trust. "Elias," I said, my voice quiet but clear, "and according to my last quarterly statement from the trust, we have a significant portion of our liquid assets managed by their private wealth division. Is that correct?" I could almost hear the faint smile in his voice. "That is correct," he confirmed. "A formidable portion. $3.5 billion to be exact." I took a deep, steadying breath, the scent of rain and earth filling my lungs. The decision was already made. It had been made for me on the 47th floor of that glass tower in Denver. "It's time, Elias," I said the words, feeling like a key turning in a lock that had been rusted shut for 15 years. "It's time they learn what $100 can truly cost." The decision once made settled not with the heat of anger, but with the cold, dense weight of inevitability. The next morning, the Oregon rain fell in a steady cleansing sheet, drumming a soft rhythm on the metal roof of my workshop. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and welding flux. My satellite phone sat on the workbench, and precisely at 8:00 a.m. Pacific time, its screen flickered to life. Elias Vance's face appeared crisp and clear, despite the thousands of miles between us. His study in Boston was exactly as I remembered it, a warm, book-lined cocoon of old leather and polished mahogany. A fire crackled in the hearth behind him. It was a world away from my rustic barn, but looking at his familiar, intelligent eyes, I felt an anchor of calm. This was our war room, spanning a continent. "Good morning, Kaya," he said, his voice a comforting baritone. "Did you sleep?" "Not much," I admitted, taking a sip of my coffee, "but my mind is clear." "Good." He nodded, his expression shifting from grandfatherly concern to that of the sharp strategic counsel he was famous for. "Then let's begin. Our first order of business is to understand the terrain. Pioneer Heritage Bank is not just any institution. They are a fortress, but a fortress with a cracked foundation." He shared his screen, and a sleek encrypted interface filled my monitor. It was a detailed analysis of the bank. "They are old money," Kaya Elias explained, his voice low and precise. "Their wealth was built a century ago on railroads and mining. Today they are hemorrhaging clients to the newer, more agile tech finance firms. They are desperate, and I do mean desperate, to prove they are still relevant. They need to land what the market calls new paradigm wealth." He clicked, and the logo for the Ethelgard Trust appeared on the screen. "And we, my dear," he said with a wry smile, "are the biggest, most mysterious, and most sought-after new paradigm whale in the ocean. For years, their president, a man named Marcus Thorne, has been trying to identify our beneficial owner. They've sent feelers, offered exorbitant perks to my office. They want us badly. They see us as their salvation, their ticket to the future." I leaned forward, the pieces clicking into place. "So, they're hungry," I said, "and we're about to offer them a feast." "Precisely," Elias said, "but this cannot be an attack. An attack would be messy, emotional. This must be a market correction of ethics. It must be executed with the cold, clean logic of a financial transaction. We will not give them the satisfaction of seeing your anger. We will give them what they want most, and then we will use their own greed as the lever to bring the walls down." Over the next several hours, we constructed the plan. It was intricate, layered, and beautiful in its brutal simplicity. The first layer was authority. I would not be Kaya Sterling, a strange sister. I would be the official, long-awaited representative of the Ethelgard Trust, a figure of immense power they had only ever dreamed of meeting. The second layer was the bait. "I'll draft a proposal," I said, already sketching notes in a worn notebook. "A global ESG initiative, reforestation in the Amazon, large-scale water purification projects in Southeast Asia, funding for sustainable agriculture right here in the States. It will be real, it will be sincere, and it will be profitable." Elias's eyes twinkled. "You'll dangle the opportunity for them to become the world's premier bank for ethical investing. You will appeal directly to Marcus Thorne's vanity. The man is obsessed with his legacy. He doesn't want to be remembered as the man who managed his grandfather's money. He wants to be a titan, a visionary." Then came the final layer. The blade itself, the condition. And to fund this grand new partnership, I said the words, feeling sharp and clean on my tongue, "The trust will need to consolidate its assets, for logistical and fiduciary reasons, of course. A complete withdrawal of our current holdings from their management as a simple preliminary step. You will force them to facilitate their own capital flight." Elias finished, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. "You will make them hold the door for you as you walk out with their future. It's diabolical, Kaya. I love it." He shared his screen again. This time it was a dossier complete with photos and detailed biographies of every member of the Pioneer Heritage Executive Board. "Know your audience," he said. I studied their faces, a gallery of stern, privileged men. And then he landed on Marcus Thorne. Mid-60s, a carefully maintained tan, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The notes beside his photo were concise, legacy-obsessed, terrified of being seen as obsolete, deeply insecure about his Ivy League education being a result of family connections, not merit. His vanity is our primary leverage. Now, Elias said, his tone shifting. Let's talk about you. The flannel is charming, my dear, and I am personally a fan, but it will not play in that boardroom. I sighed. Elias, I'm not going to play dress-up. It's not dress-up, Kaya. It is a costume. A uniform for a very specific battle, he countered gently. They live in a world of symbols. You must speak their language. Not flashy, never flashy, just undeniable, understated, impeccably tailored, powerful. Think of it as camouflage. I reluctantly agreed. The next hour was spent in the surreal exercise of Elias and I role-playing the meeting. He played the part of Thorne and the skeptical board members, grilling me with sharp, cynical questions about risk yield and market penetration. Miss Ethelgard, he boomed, adopting a pompous, theatrical voice. Your environmental goals are admirable, but this is a bank, not a charity. How can you guarantee a competitive return for our shareholders? I didn't hesitate. I leaned into the camera, letting my own quiet confidence fill the space. Mr. Thorne, I replied calmly, the greatest risk in the 21st century market is ignoring the consequences of environmental collapse. Sustainability is no longer a niche market, it is the only market. The returns won't just be competitive, they will be defining because we will be investing in the one commodity that is becoming increasingly scarce: a habitable planet. I continued laying out data projections and market analyses I had spent years studying. When I finished, Elias was silent for a moment, his theatrical persona gone. He was genuinely impressed. Well, he said quietly, it appears I am not the only one who has been doing their homework. But even with the plan laid out, a flicker of doubt, cold and sharp, pierced through my resolve. I looked around my workshop at the honest, real things I had built with my own two hands. Elias, I started my voice, barely a whisper. Is this too much? The fallout from this? It could be significant. People could lose their jobs. It feels destructive. His expression softened. He leaned closer to his camera, his gaze holding mine from across the continent. Kaya, he said, his voice firm but kind. They built a world on the explicit principle that money is power and that compassion is a liability. You are not being destructive. You are introducing a consequence. You are simply asking them to honor their own rules. Remember what Serafina said to you. Remember how she made you feel. This is not about the money. This is about showing them that character is the one asset you can't collateralize, and integrity is the one debt you can't escape. His words settled the last of the trembling in my soul. He was right. This wasn't an act of destruction. It was an act of calibration. My resolve hardened, no longer a cold weight, but a sharpened edge. While Elias began drafting the official meeting request from his office, I turned to my own computer. My fingers flew across the keyboard. First, a one-way first-class ticket to Denver. No more economy. Next, a reservation at the Four Seasons, the presidential suite. They wouldn't see Kaya Sterling, the sister who played in the dirt. They would meet the woman who could buy their bank without a second thought. The blade was sharpened, and I was ready to wield it. My return to Denver was a whisper. The first time I had arrived like a stray leaf blown in by the wind, unnoticed and out of place. This time, I arrived like the changing of the barometric pressure before a storm. Silent but felt. There was no shuttle bus, no hauling of a worn duffel bag. A quiet professional car service was waiting for me at the terminal, the driver holding a simple sign with my last name. He didn't speak unless spoken to, and the interior of the black sedan was hushed and smelled faintly of bergamot. I wore a charcoal gray cashmere coat that felt less like clothing and more like armor. It was one of several pieces Elias had insisted upon, curated by a personal shopper in New York, and delivered to my Oregon homestead in discreet boxes. He was right. It wasn't a costume. It was camouflage allowing me to move through this world unseen yet acknowledged. We pulled up to the Four Seasons, and a doorman opened my door before the car had fully stopped. "Welcome, miss," Sterling, he said his greeting, smooth and practiced. There was no flicker of surprise, no questioning glance. In this world, power announced itself quietly. I was escorted directly to a private elevator. There was no check-in desk, no waiting in line. The elevator ascended with a silent, frictionless hum, opening directly into the Skycrest suite. The space was breathtaking and utterly impersonal. It was a 3,000-square-foot expanse of pale wood floors, minimalist furniture, and museum-quality art. But the true luxury was the view. 2 entire walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a stunning 270-degree panorama of the city and the mountains beyond. It was a higher, more commanding, and more complete view than Serafina's. From here, her office in the Pioneer Heritage Building was just one small box among thousands. It made her feel contained. Before I even took off my coat, before I unpacked the new, unfamiliar clothes in my suitcase, I had work to do. My first order of business in Denver was not to plan an attack, but to complete an act of creation. I sat at a large glass desk, opened a hardened military-grade laptop, and began the process. It was a familiar ritual. The laptop connected to a secure node, tunneling my connection through 3 different countries before I even began. I accessed the portal for a small private philanthropic foundation I control, one based in Geneva. Its name is the Tilia Fund, named after the linden trees that lined the street of my childhood home. A quiet piece of my past, repurposed. My fingers moved with practiced speed. I initiated a transfer of $50,000. The instructions were layered complex. The funds would move from Geneva to a holding account in Luxembourg, then be converted and wired from a non-profit clearinghouse in Toronto before finally landing in the meager bank account of the 5 Points Community Garden. The transaction would be recorded on their end with a simple, untraceable memo from a friend of the harvest. The entire process took less than 5 minutes. A few clicks, a few lines of code, and I had solved the problem that started this all. I had rendered my sister's cruelty, her grand pronouncements from her throne on the 47th floor, not just unkind, but completely and utterly irrelevant. That I realized was true power, not the ability to command people, but the ability to make their judgments meaningless. A small, warm feeling spread through my chest. With the core mission accomplished, I took out a small, anonymous burner phone I'd purchased for cash on my way from the airport. I dialed Matteo's number. He picked up on the second ring, his voice breathless and frantic with joy. "Hello, Matteo. It's Kaya," I said softly. "I was just calling to see if you managed to sort out the pump." Kaya. "Oh my God, you are not going to believe this." He exclaimed, his words tumbling over one another in a rush. "It's a miracle! A literal miracle! I was on the phone this morning practically begging the bank for a microloan, and then bam, I check our account online, and there's a deposit. Not $100, Kaya, $50,000, I smiled, closing my eyes. "Wow, Matteo, that's incredible. Incredible doesn't even cover it." He laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated delight. "We can buy the new pump, obviously, but we can also build the greenhouse for the winter seedlings and get the soil supplements we need for the spring expansion. And I can finally hire Maria part-time to help me run the after-school programs for the neighborhood kids." Kaya, this changes everything it just says. From a friend of the harvest. I have no idea who it was. Well, I said, my voice warm. "It sounds like you have a guardian angel." "I guess so," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I really guess so." We talked for a few more minutes, his joy a tangible thing, a current of warmth flowing through the phone. It was my anchor. It was the reason. His world of dirt and kale and helping kids was infinitely more real and more valuable than Sarah's world of numbers and status. After we hung up, I walked to the vast window and looked down at the city lights beginning to flicker on as dusk settled over Denver. The Pioneer Heritage Building stood proud, its top floors still brightly lit. My sister was probably still in there orchestrating deals, performing power, completely oblivious. I thought about a lifetime of being invisible. To my parents, I was the quiet, difficult one, the one whose passions were strange and impractical. To Sarah, I was a footnote of failure, a source of secondhand embarrassment. For so long, I had seen that invisibility as a weakness, a curse. But standing here now, a ghost in the machine of this city, I realized it was my greatest strength. They never saw me coming, because they never ever bothered to look. They were so busy staring at the sky, they never noticed the ground shifting beneath their feet. My laptop chimed with a soft, encrypted notification. A secure message from Elias. It contained only 5 words. "Ready when you are, my dear." I stood there watching the lights of my sister's office, and a cold, calm certainty settled over me. The quiet was over. I typed my reply. A single word. Send. And somewhere in a quiet study in Boston, a finger clicked a mouse. An email, polite and formal, shot across the country and into the servers of Pioneer Heritage Bank and Trust. The subject line was simple, elegant, and devastating. Meeting request. The Ethelgard Trust. The ghost had just knocked on the door, and the storm was about to begin. The email, Elias later told me, did not land at Pioneer Heritage Bank. It detonated. I didn't have to be there to see the shockwave, of course. I had Elias's dry, witty reports and a lifetime of observing the players involved. My own imagination filled in the colors. I could picture it perfectly. Marcus Thorne, the bank's president, sitting in his cavernous office, probably sipping some overpriced single-origin coffee. He would have seen the email from Elias Vance, a name that carries immense weight in the hushed circles of old money and law. He would have seen the subject line, Meeting Request, the Ethelgard Trust, and I imagine his heart for a moment would have stopped. I see him leaning forward, his feigned nonchalance evaporating like morning mist. He reads the polite, formal request for a meeting to discuss a significant, mutually beneficial strategic partnership, and a slow, predatory grin spreads across his face. This was it. The white whale, the golden fleece, the culmination of a 5-year hunt, Cynthia. I can almost hear him bellowing to his long-suffering executive assistant, "Clear my schedule, clear the board's schedule, get me our top analysts in the main boardroom now." From the quiet sanctuary of my suite, I imagined the frantic electric energy coursing through that glass tower. Phones would be ringing, meetings would be canceled. An emergency session of the executive board would be called the mood, a giddy mix of panic and elation. They were about to meet the ghost. I can see them, the 10 of them, gathered around that massive polished table where my sister would one day kneel. They would speculate in hushed, excited tones. It has to be the sovereign wealth fund of a small nation, one would insist. Look at the capital flow. Nonsense, Frank, another would argue. This has all the hallmarks of a reclusive tech founder, someone who's been off-grid since their IPO. The ethical investment angle is pure Silicon Valley branding. My money, Thorne would announce, his voice filled with a self-important boom, is on a European dynasty. Old money looking for a modern, stable American home for their assets. It doesn't matter. What matters is that they chose us. He'd puff out his chest. Gentlemen, this isn't just a client. This is a philosophical and financial keystone. We land the Ethelgard Trust, and we become the future of finance. The Thorne era of Pioneer Heritage begins today. And my sister, Sarah, she wouldn't have been in that room. The invitation was for the executive board, only a detail that I knew would needle her professional pride. I could picture her at lunch, sitting across from her husband Julian at some sleek, overpriced Denver restaurant. I see her checking a text from a gossiping colleague, then rolling her eyes. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Julian," she'd say, placing her phone down with a delicate, dismissive clink. Thorne has the entire bank in a panic over this Ethelgard meeting. It's absurd. "Isn't that your department's biggest account?" Julian would ask, likely more interested in the numbers than the drama. Technically, Sarah would concede, sipping her wine, but these mystery clients are all the same. They posture, they send some ancient lawyer to make arcane demands, and we flatter them. You offer them a dedicated wine locker and a slightly better interest rate, and they stay put. It's a dance. And frankly, she'd add with a confident smirk, they're lucky I'm not in that room. Thorne will probably try to oversell them. It takes a certain finesse. Her arrogance was a shield, but it was also a blindfold. She saw a collection of numbers align on a spreadsheet. She couldn't conceive that behind it all was a will, a purpose, a person she had deemed worthless. While they scrambled, I spent my day at the Denver Botanic Gardens. I walked through the humid, fragrant air of the tropical conservatory, the scent of orchids and damp earth a welcome antidote to the memory of the bank's sterile perfume. I sat on a bench for hours, sketching the intricate fractal patterns of a fern frond in my notebook. There was a profound, almost humorous irony in it all. They were in their hermetically sealed tower preparing a feast for a ghost choreographing a performance for an audience of one who was miles away, finding joy in the simple, perfect logic of a plant. They were trying to impress a persona that I, a woman in hiking boots, had invented with my lawyer in an old barn. They were dancing for me, and my calm, my complete and utter detachment from their frenzy, that was my ultimate weapon. That night, Elias updated me. A war room had been set up at the bank. A dozen young, ambitious analysts were pulling an all-nighter fueled by caffeine and fear. They were poring over every known investment the Ethelgard Trust had ever made, trying to build a psychological profile of its owner. They've noted the pattern, of course, Elias told me over our secure line, a note of amusement in his voice. The consistent funding of renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, clean water tech. They've classified it as a robust and well-managed branding strategy. They believe it's a public relations angle. They simply cannot comprehend that it might be a genuine conviction. They were analyzing my shadow, trying to deduce its shape, without ever once thinking to look at the person casting it. Later that evening, as I stood by the window of my suite watching the city glitter below my burner phone buzzed on the glass-topped table beside me, it was a text from Elias. They have confirmed the meeting. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., the main executive boardroom. The entire board will be present. They have, as the saying goes, rolled out the red carpet. A second text came through a moment later. Try not to trip. A small smile touched my lips. I looked out at the Pioneer Heritage Building, a beacon of self-importance in the night sky. The red carpet was for a ghost they thought they understood. Tomorrow they would finally meet her, and they would learn to their profound and everlasting regret that they had understood nothing at all. The morning of the meeting, the sky over Denver was a brilliant cloudless blue, a perfect day for an execution. I stepped out of the black sedan that had glided to a stop in front of the Pioneer Heritage Tower, and this time the building did not feel imposing. It felt small. I wore a suit of deep navy blue, tailored so perfectly it felt like a second skin. It was the kind of clothing that didn't shout its expense, it whispered it. As I pushed through the heavy glass doors, I moved with a purpose that parted the sea of morning commuters in the lobby. There was no hesitation, no need to ask for directions. I knew exactly where I was going. I hadn't even taken 5 steps across the gleaming marble floor when a figure detached himself from the wall and moved to intercept me. It was Marcus Thorne. He was shorter than I'd pictured, with a country club tan and hair that was just a little too perfectly coiffed. A nervous kinetic energy buzzed around him, a frantic hummingbird heart hidden beneath an expensive suit. He approached with his hand outstretched, a salesman's smile plastered on his face. "Ms. Sterling?" he asked, his voice a smooth, practiced baritone that couldn't quite hide a tremor of anxiety. "Marcus Thorne. An absolute, unmitigated honor to welcome you to Pioneer Heritage." His handshake was too firm a classic alpha male gesture that screamed insecurity. "The honor is mine, Mr. Thorne," I said, my voice even and calm. I met his gaze directly, and he was the first to look away. "Please call me Marcus," he insisted, gesturing with a sweep of his arm. "Right this way. The board is eagerly awaiting your arrival." He personally escorted me to the private elevator, making stilted small talk about the weather, the flight from Oregon, the city of Denver. I responded with polite one-word answers, letting the silence hang between us. I could feel his discomfort growing with every quiet step down the long, art-lined corridor toward the executive boardroom. He was used to being the one in control, the one courted and flattered. My quiet composure was unbalancing him. He pushed open the massive oak doors to the boardroom, and the low hum of conversation within instantly ceased. 10 men, all of them older than me, all of them exuding the easy arrogance of inherited wealth and power, fell silent. As one, they rose to their feet. I scanned their faces, clocking each one against the dossier Elias and I had studied. There was Frank, the skeptical CFO. There was Richard, the aggressive head of trading, and a gallery of others, all of them now staring at me with a uniform expression of poorly concealed surprise. They had been expecting a man, a seasoned gray-haired lawyer like Elias. They were not prepared for me, and in their surprise I saw my opening. "Gentlemen," I said, my voice carrying easily across the cavernous room. Thorne, flustered, gestured toward the head of the table, the seat of ultimate power opposite his own. "Please, Miss Sterling, make yourself comfortable." I took the seat, placing a single slim leather portfolio on the polished wood. I didn't open it. I let my hands rest calmly on the table and surveyed the room, letting the silence stretch just long enough to become uncomfortable. Thorne cleared his throat, about to launch into what was surely a well-rehearsed welcome speech, but I spoke first, taking control before he could even begin. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, my gaze moving from one man to the next, meeting each of their eyes. "Thank you for your time. I am here on behalf of the Ethelgard Trust to discuss the future, not just the future of banking, but the future of capital itself." I saw the CFO, Frank, raise a skeptical eyebrow. Perfect. I had him. For the better part of a century, I continued, my voice steady, and sure, the primary driver of investment has been the mitigation of financial risk. A sound, logical principle, but that principle is now dangerously obsolete, because the greatest risk in the 21st century market, the risk that outweighs all others, is the catastrophic cost of inaction in the face of systemic environmental collapse. I didn't use their presentation screens. I didn't need charts or graphs. I was the presentation. The Ethelgard Trust was founded on a single core belief that sustainability is no longer a niche market or a branding exercise. It is the market, and its potential for growth is unprecedented. I laid out the vision, the 3 pillars: water, soil, and air. I spoke of large-scale water purification initiatives in developing nations, not as charity, but as a foothold in the most valuable emerging economies on Earth. I spoke of funding regenerative agriculture not just to feed people, but to create carbon capture systems that would generate billions in carbon credits. I spoke their language of diversified asset classes, long-term growth vectors, and untapped markets, but I applied it to concepts they had only ever considered in the context of philanthropy. I watched their faces as I spoke. The initial skepticism on Frank's face melted into intrigued calculation. Richard the trader was leaning so far forward, he was nearly out of his chair, his eyes gleaming with the unmistakable light of pure, unadulterated greed. They were beginning to see it, astronomical profits wrapped in the bulletproof public relations of saving the world. And Thorne was practically vibrating. His face was flushed with excitement. He wasn't just seeing a deal. He was seeing his Nobel Prize, his name etched in the history books. I decided to bring it home to make it personal for them. "We could even begin the pilot program right here in Denver," I said, allowing a thoughtful pause. "There are several small but incredibly promising urban agriculture initiatives in this city, projects showing remarkable community ROI. A modest initial investment in a venture like that could yield invaluable data and a tremendous amount of local goodwill." I thought of Matteo, of his ecstatic voice on the phone. A private smile bloomed and died in my mind, fueling the sincerity of my performance. I let the vision hang in the air for a moment, letting them savor it, letting the scent of money and legacy fill the room until it was intoxicating. Then I delivered the hook. I leaned forward slightly, my voice dropping to a more intimate conspiratorial tone. "The Ethelgard Trust," I said slowly, "is prepared to commit its full and considerable resources to this vision, We believe in building legacies, not just quarterly returns. I paused, making eye contact with Thorne. And we are looking for a primary banking partner to build this legacy with us. The room was utterly silent, spellbound. Every man at that table was completely and totally hooked. The bait had been taken. Marcus Thorne's chest puffed out. He cleared his throat, his face a mask of supreme triumph. He opened his mouth, ready to agree, ready to promise me the world, ready to hand me the keys to his kingdom. And right there, in that moment of his absolute unthinking certainty, I knew I had him. The trap was set. All I had to do now was spring it. The silence in the room was thick with greed. It was a tangible thing, a pressure against the ears. I had offered them a kingdom wrapped in virtue, and every man at that table was ready to pledge fealty. Marcus Thorne, his face flushed with a rosy, triumphant glow, pushed his chair back and stood. He clasped his hands behind his back, adopting the posture of a benevolent emperor addressing his court. "Miss Sterling," he began, his voice booming with manufactured gravitas, I am rarely at a loss for words, but what you have presented here today is more than a proposal. It is a paradigm shift, a new dawn, not just for pioneer heritage, but for the very soul of American finance." He was practically singing. He paced a little, warming to his theme. "The synergy between the Ethelgard Trust's vision and our bank's long-standing tradition of excellence is palpable. Palpable. This isn't just a partnership, it is a destiny." I let him go on. I let him savor the taste of a victory he believed was his. It was a courtesy, the same kind of courtesy a predator affords its prey in the final moments before the strike. He finally turned to me, his arms spread wide. "And so, on behalf of our entire board, I want to say that we don't just accept your proposal, we embrace it. Wholeheartedly, we are all in." The other men around the table nodded vigorously, their faces alight with the promise of future bonuses. The deal was done. The bait was not just taken, it had been swallowed whole. I let the moment hang there for a beat. Then I raised a single hand, a small, quiet gesture that nonetheless cut through his performance like a razor. He stopped, his mouth still slightly open. "I'm glad we are in alignment, Marcus," I said, my tone shifting, the warmth draining from it, to be replaced by something cooler, more clinical. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 5 degrees. There are, of course, a few logistical steps to initiating a partnership of this scale. Thorne blinked, his triumphant smile still fixed on his face, though it was beginning to look strained. Of course. Whatever you need, our teams are at your complete disposal." "Excellent," I said. I folded my hands on the table in front of me. "To streamline the creation of the new ESG fund and to ensure maximum capital efficiency from day one, we will first need to liquidate our current asset portfolio and consolidate the capital under a single new charter." I paused, letting the corporate jargon settle over them like a comforting blanket before delivering the blow. Therefore, I continued, my voice calm, "And even as a preliminary step, the Ethelgard Trust will be withdrawing its full holdings from Pioneer Heritage Bank and Trust effective immediately." I let my eyes sweep across their faces. The sum is approximately $3.5 billion. The number hung in the air. It didn't land like a statement. It landed like a physical object, sucking the oxygen from the room. I watched in slow motion as the meaning seeped in. Thorne's smile froze, then began to twitch at the corners. He gave a short, choked laugh. "The withdrawing," he stammered. "A slip of the tongue, I'm sure. You mean a transfer. A transfer into the new fund we will be creating together, of course." "No," I said, my voice unwavering, cutting through his desperate hope. "A withdrawal. The funds will be transferred to a new independent holding account while my trustee and I finalize the charter for the new initiative. Consider it a resetting of the board, a clearing of the slate." The polite confusion on the faces around the table curdled into dawning horror. I saw the CFO Frank go pale, his hand reflexively clutching his chest. But it was the bank's chief legal counsel, a sharp-eyed woman named Anya, who had remained silent until now, who truly understood first. Her eyes widened not with financial panic, but with the cold terror of legal consequence. She wasn't seeing a lost client. She was seeing catastrophic capital flight. She was seeing emergency SEC filings, panicked investor calls, a stock price in freefall. She was seeing the abyss. Thorne, finally grasping the precipice he was standing on, sputtered, But who has the authority to make a request of this magnitude?" he pleaded, looking around the room as if searching for an adult. "We would need to speak with the principal beneficiary directly. It's protocol." I leaned forward just slightly, my voice dropping to a soft, intimate whisper that was somehow louder than all the shouting that was about to happen. "You are," I said, a beat of absolute silence. "My name," I added, "is Kaya Sterling. I am the founder and sole beneficiary of the Ethelgard Trust, Sterling." The name detonated in the quiet room. I saw two board members who knew my sister physically recoil. I saw Thorne's eyes widen in utter, uncomprehending shock. The connection was made, the impossible, illogical, world-shattering connection between the woman who held the fate of his bank in her hands and the woman he knew only as his vice president's embarrassing hippie sister. The only sound in the room was the soft clink of a heavy gold-plated pen as it slipped from someone's nerveless fingers and hit the polished table. Thorne's composure didn't just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. The titan of industry vanished, replaced by a desperate, pleading man. "Miss Sterling, Kaya," he stammered, his voice thin and reedy. He tried to force a smile, a grotesque grimace of terror. Surely this is a misunderstanding, a negotiating tactic. We can be flexible, whatever terms you want. We can renegotiate the management fees, offer you a seat on the board, anything. But a withdrawal of this size, on such short notice, it's not feasible. I pushed my chair back and stood the motion calm and final. The meeting was over. "Marcus," I said, looking down at him. The use of his first name now was not an invitation to familiarity, but a final assertion of dominance. "My trust has had its money in your bank for over 7 years. When my family lost everything, it was on a few hours' notice. I'm simply returning the courtesy." His face crumpled in confusion, the reference to my family's past, completely lost on him, which was in itself the entire point. I turned to the rest of the silent, ashen-faced board. "My trustee, Mr. Elias Vance, will be in touch with your legal team momentarily to facilitate the transfer. I expect your full cooperation." I walked towards the door, my footsteps echoing in the tomb-like silence. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the weight of their terror, the crushing gravity of their ruin pressing in on them. I pulled the heavy oak door open, stepped into the hallway, and let it click shut behind me, sealing them inside with the consequences they had so arrogantly, so foolishly invited in. "You stopped," this response. The heavy oak door of the boardroom clicked shut behind me, the sound as soft and final as the closing of a casket lid. I didn't need to be in the room to know what happened next. I could feel it through the floor as I walked toward the elevator. For a single suspended moment, there would have been absolute silence, the kind of dense, ringing quiet that follows a massive explosion. And then, pandemonium. I imagined the scene as the elevator carried me silently downward, a ghost departing the scene of the crime. The 10 powerful men I left behind would have erupted. Voices would be raised, accusations hurled. The veneer of civilized corporate behavior would be stripped away in an instant, revealing the raw, primal panic beneath. "What in God's name just happened?" one would shout. "Get Anya on the phone with the SEC now." Another would bark into his phone. "We need to get ahead of this. We need to control the narrative." Frank, the pale-faced CFO, would likely be hyperventilating his mind frantically, trying to calculate the impact on their capital reserves. 3.5 billion, he'd whisper the number, a death sentence. "Our liquidity, we don't have it. Not liquid, not like this. We'll have to fire sale assets. It will trigger a run." The trading floor 20 floors below would be a hive of panicked whispers as the impossible, catastrophic order began to trickle down, a freeze on all non-essential trades, a lockdown on all external communications. time itself would seem to stop. The bank's entire glorious future, which had been soaring toward the heavens just moments before, was now frozen mid-flight, about to shatter on the ground. Careers were flashing before their eyes. Legacies were turning to dust. And at the center of the storm would be Marcus Thorne. I can see him, his face ashen, his hands shaking with a rage born of pure terror. He'd be stabbing at his phone, his fingers clumsy, trying to call the only person he could think of who might have a lever to pull. He would call Elias. The scene shifts in my mind across the country to that warm, book-lined study in Boston. Elias would be sitting in his favorite leather wingback chair, a cup of Earl Grey steaming gently on the table beside him. He would see Thorne's name flash on his phone, and a small, satisfied smile would touch his lips before he answered, his voice the epitome of calm. "Marcus," he would say, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" Thorne's voice would be a strangled, incoherent squawk on the other end. "Vance, what is this? What is she doing? You have to stop her. This is market manipulation. It's insanity." Elias would take a slow, deliberate sip of his tea. "Marcus, I understand you're upset," he'd reply, his voice a soothing, implacable balm of legal formality. "However, as I'm sure you appreciate, this is a sensitive financial matter. As per the legal notice which your counsel should be receiving—" "Oh, right about now," he'd say, glancing at a clock on his mantelpiece, "all communication must henceforth be directed through our official legal channels. I'm afraid I can't discuss it with you further. Do have a good day." And then click. Thorne thwarted, his lifeline severed, would slam his phone down. He'd pace the length of the boardroom like a caged animal, his mind racing, searching, desperate for a target for his terror and rage. He couldn't get to the ghost who had just vanished. He couldn't get through the stone wall of her lawyer, but the name she had left behind like a lit fuse. "Sterling, Sterling," he would whisper, and then he'd roar it. "Sterling." He'd jab the intercom on his desk. "Cynthia, get me Seraphina Sterling. Get her in this boardroom immediately. I don't care if she's in a meeting with God himself. Tell her to run." And somewhere on a lower floor, my sister's carefully orchestrated world was about to end. I can picture her too. She's probably in a conference room, condescendingly explaining the benefits of a new investment vehicle to a wealthy client, feeling powerful, feeling essential. Her assistant, a young woman with wide, nervous eyes, would hurry in and whisper the summons in her ear. I see Sarah's expression. Not fear, annoyance, a deep put-upon sigh. Honestly, she would think, what has Thorne done now? She would excuse herself from her meeting with a polished, apologetic smile, her mind already preparing a lecture for her boss on the proper way to handle sensitive clients. She would assume she was being called in to fix something, to be the hero. I can see her walk, that confident, purposeful stride, the sound of her expensive heels clicking in authoritative rhythm on the marble floors, the respectful, slightly fearful nods from junior employees as she passes. It is the walk of a woman who believes she is untouchable, a queen in her own right. It is the last time she will ever walk through these halls with that unshakable sense of power. She is walking toward her own execution, and she is utterly, blissfully unaware. She reaches the heavy oak doors of the executive boardroom. She can hear the faint, muffled sounds of shouting from within. Her brow furrows. Amateurs, she'd think with a smirk. She takes a moment to compose herself. She smooths the front of her suit jacket, straightens her spine, and places a polite, professional "I'm here to solve everything" smile on her lips. She pushes the heavy doors open. The chapter ends here on this moment. The smile freezes on her face. The scene that greets her is not a business meeting gone awry. It is a portrait of pure chaos. 10 powerful men, their faces masks of pale, sweaty terror. And at the center of it all, Marcus Thorne, his face purple with rage, turning his terrified, hate-filled eyes away from the abyss and directly onto her. The rest of the day passed in the quiet, insulated calm of my hotel suite. I didn't need to watch the news or listen to financial gossip to know the city's banking sector was in turmoil. Elias gave me periodic, concise updates. Marcus Thorne had officially postponed a major upcoming merger. The bank's stock was experiencing volatility, Elias's dry term for plummeting, and Seraphina, Serafina had been placed on indefinite administrative leave and was seen leaving the building escorted by security. A quiet corporate execution. I ordered room service I didn't eat and watched the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in strokes of bruised purple and fiery orange. I knew this wasn't over. The financial damage was done, but the personal wound was still raw, still bleeding. I knew she would come. Just after 9 o'clock, the private buzzer for my suite chimed a soft, discreet sound. I walked to the door and looked at the security monitor. There she was, a ghost. It was Serafina, but a version of her I had never seen before. The impeccable suit was rumpled. The severe, elegant chignon had come partially undone, with strands of hair clinging to her neck. Her makeup was a disastrous map of her tears mascara, having carved dark rivers down her pale cheeks. The mask of untouchable superiority had been utterly shattered. She looked small, lost, and broken. I took a breath and opened the door. She stared at me, her eyes wide and red-rimmed, searching my face for something. An answer. An enemy. I don't know. She stumbled past me into the vast living room of the suite, her gaze sweeping over the floor-to-ceiling windows, the expensive art, the sheer scale of the space that dwarfed her own corner office. She looked like a drowning person trying to comprehend the size of the ocean. She turned to face me, her whole body trembling. "Kaya," she finally managed her voice, a strangled, ragged whisper I could barely hear. "What is this? What have you done?" I didn't answer right away. I walked past her to the window, the city lights a glittering carpet spread out beneath us. My city for tonight. "Do you remember that day in your office, Sarah?" I asked, my voice quiet, my back still to her. "You told me it was a place for people who build things." I turned to look at her. My expression wasn't triumphant or angry. It was just weary, so incredibly weary. "I did build something," I said softly. "I built something that could give millions of people clean water, something that could help heal the world. And you?" I gestured vaguely at the opulent empty room at the city beyond. "You built this, a beautiful empty cage made of glass, and someone else's gold." She just stared, her mind refusing to connect the dots. So calmly, methodically, I laid out the truth. I told her about the long nights after our family's collapse, retreating into science while she retreated into Julian's ambition. I told her about the filtration system, the patent the Shell Corporation Elias helped me create. I told her about the Ethelgard Trust. I explained in simple, undeniable terms that the bank she had dedicated her life to the institution that had become her entire identity had been for years unknowingly profiting from the quiet, relentless success of the little sister she had scorned and discarded. Her first reaction was denial, a fierce, violent rejection of a reality she could not bear. No, she shrieked the sound raw and ugly in the pristine quiet of the suite. "You're lying. This is a joke. Some sick, twisted, elaborate prank to make me feel bad. You were always jealous, always hiding in the corner, scribbling in your notebooks because you couldn't handle the real world." Her voice cracked. "You ran away to Oregon to play with plants because you are a failure." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Her rage was a fire burning on nothing but air. I walked over to the sleek leather briefcase on the desk, opened it, and took out a single slim folder. I walked back to the glass coffee table that sat between us and gently placed it down. "This," I said, "is a certified copy of the Ethelgard Trust's founding charter, signed by me and notarized by Elias Vance 15 years ago." She stared at the document as if it were a venomous snake. Her breath hitched. Slowly, like a sleepwalker, she reached out a trembling hand and flipped open the cover. She saw my name, my signature, and the vast, incomprehensible numbers that followed. The proof was irrefutable, and it broke her. The rage, the denial, the arrogant fire in her eyes, it all just extinguished. The foundation of her life, the core belief in her own superiority that she had built over the bodies of our family's misfortunes, crumbled into dust in that single moment. She sank onto the edge of the expensive sofa, her body folding in on itself. "My career," she whispered the words, dissolving into a sob. "My reputation, My house, Julian. Her voice cracked on his name. She started pleading, then her eyes wild with a desperation that was terrifying to behold. Kaya, please, she begged, her voice rising with each word. Please, you can't do this. I'll be ruined. Everything I've worked for. It will all be gone. You can't do this to me. And then it happened. As she tried to stand, her legs seemed to give out from under her. She stumbled forward, catching herself on the edge of the coffee table for a moment, before she sank, with a soft, defeated sound to her knees on the plush, cream-colored carpet. Serafina Sterling, my proud, indomitable, untouchable sister, was kneeling at my feet. Tears streamed down her face, leaving clean tracks through the ruined makeup. She looked up at me, her face a crumpled mask of utter despair. Please, she whispered the word, a ragged, breathless prayer. Don't do this to me, Kaya. I'm your sister. I looked down at her, and I felt nothing. No triumph, no satisfaction, just a profound, aching sadness that felt as vast as the night sky outside the window. A sadness for the sister I once had, and for the woman she had chosen to become. You stopped being my sister the day you watched our family crumble and chose a life of comfortable lies, I said, my voice low, and even each word a carefully placed stone on the grave of our relationship. You stopped being my sister when you mocked a request for $100 meant to give people water for their garden. I looked at her kneeling there, a queen deposed in a kingdom she never knew I owned. This isn't me doing something to you, Sarah, I said softly. This is you, finally, after all these years, paying a debt that was never about the money. I held her gaze for one last moment, then I turned, walked into the master bedroom, and quietly closed the door, leaving her alone, kneeling in the silent, opulent ruins of her life. I don't know how long Serafina stayed kneeling on the floor after I closed the bedroom door. An hour, maybe 2. Eventually I heard the soft, final click of the suite's main door closing, and then there was only silence. The adrenaline of the confrontation drained away, leaving behind a hollow, quiet ache. I had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a verdict, a necessary, painful, and deeply lonely one. The next morning, the financial world began to scream. My laptop chimed with a news alert from a major financial journal. The headline was stark: Pioneer Heritage PHBT stock plummets on rumors of major asset reallocation. The article was filled with panicked analyst quotes citing an unprecedented and hostile capital flight by a major institutional client. Buried in the 5th paragraph was a single, devastating sentence. A source inside the bank has confirmed that a senior vice president in the private wealth division has been placed on indefinite leave pending an internal review. They didn't have to name her. The ripple had become a tidal wave. Just as I finished reading the article, my personal phone, the one I rarely used, the one my family had the number for, began to ring. The screen glowed with a name I hadn't seen in months, Mom. For a single foolish beat, my heart leaped with a flicker of hope. Maybe she was calling to see if I was okay. Maybe she'd heard something and was worried. It was a stupid hope, the ghost of a daughter's wish for her mother. I took a breath and answered. "Hello," I said. The voice that came back was not warm. It was thin, high-pitched, and vibrating with panic. "Kaya, what have you done?" she cried, her voice in accusation before I could even speak. "Mom, Julian just called me," she shrieked, cutting me off. "He told me everything. You marched into that bank and you destroyed your sister's career. You got her fired after everything she's done for this family, after all her success. How could you be so cruel?" The words hit me with a physical force. The narrative was already set, twisted, and solidified into a weapon aimed at me. Julian's version, Sarah's version, the version where I was the villain. "Mom, that's not what happened," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying to appeal to a reason that I knew wasn't there. Sarah's suspension was a result of the bank's internal ethics review, a consequence of her own. "Ethics?" She scoffed the word, a bitter, ugly sound. "Your sister is the most successful person in this family. She was trying to build a legacy, something your father could never manage, and you come along with your..." your jealousy, and you tear it all down. She took us in when we had nothing." The lie was so profound, so deeply ingrained, that I felt the air leave my lungs. Sarah and Julian hadn't taken them in. They had held them at arm's length, doling out just enough financial support to maintain control to keep my parents tethered to their narrative of failure and gratitude. "I have to go, Mom," I said, my voice hollow. "You were always so jealous of her," she sobbed, the final crushing blow. "Always so strange, so quiet, so jealous of her light." I ended the call. I didn't slam the phone down. I just pressed the button and the connection was severed. The silence that filled the suite was absolute. The final thread to my family, the one I didn't even know I was still clinging to, was gone. I was well and truly alone. My encrypted phone buzzed, a jarring intrusion into my grief. It was Elias. I almost didn't answer, but I knew he wouldn't be calling with condolences. He'd be calling with business, a welcome distraction. "Kaya," he said, his voice calm and professional, though I could detect an undercurrent of something else. "I trust you're holding up?" "I'm fine, Elias," I lied. "Good," he said, though I knew he didn't believe me, because I've just had a most illuminating conversation with Mr. Julian Croft. I could hear the grim satisfaction in his tone. "Oh, he called me directly," Elias explained, shouting threatening lawsuits, accusing the trust of market manipulation. He was sloppy, very sloppy. Elias paused. He was not concerned about his wife's career, Kaya. He was terrified about his own financial exposure. It seems many of his personal ventures were leveraged against credit lines, co-signed by an officer of the bank. "An officer whose signature is no longer valid." "Sarah," I whispered. "Precisely," Elias confirmed. I calmly asked him if his concern was for the bank's stability or the stability of his own highly questionable investment schemes. That's when he truly lost his composure. Elias's voice became very clear, very precise. He shouted, "And I have the entire conversation recorded, my dear." He shouted, and I quote, "This is just like with her father. She's trying to ruin me just because one bad investment went south. It wasn't my fault he didn't have the stomach for the risk." I closed my eyes. There it was, a confession spat out in a torrent of arrogant rage, the proof I never had the truth my mother refused to see. Julian had just handed Elias the gun that had shot our family 15 years ago. "Thank you, Elias," I said, my voice thick. "Thank you." After we hung up, I felt emotionally scoured raw. I walked to the window, feeling the immense weight of it all. Just then, my personal phone chimed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. My first instinct was to ignore it, assuming it was another family member calling to levy accusations, but I glanced at it anyway. The message was short, 6 words. "I resigned today. Thank you. Connor, the junior associate from Sarah's office, the silent witness to my humiliation." A single tear, hot and unexpected, rolled down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, it was a tear of profound, aching gratitude. In a world of betrayal and lies, here was one small, quiet act of integrity from a stranger. It was a life raft. I wiped the tear away and walked back to the glass desk. My other laptop was open, displaying the confirmation of the wire transfer. The money had been moved from Pioneer Heritage's control to a neutral holding account at a Swiss bank. The number stared back at me from the screen, stark and absolute. $3.5 billion. It didn't feel like a prize. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like a mountain that had just been placed on my shoulders. An immense crushing responsibility, a tool, a burden, a chance. The work of tearing down was done. The work of building was about to begin. I closed the banking window. I opened a new blank document. The cursor blinked, waiting. With a steady hand, I typed the title, The Sterling Restoration Foundation Charter. 6 months. Half a year can feel like a lifetime or the blink of an eye. For me, it was both. The aftermath of Denver was a whirlwind of frantic, focused creation. While the financial press whispered about the mysterious collapse of a mid-tier bank and the quiet disgrace of its executives, I was submerged in the real work. With Elias's guidance, I had hired a small, fiercely intelligent board for my new foundation. We'd spent countless hours vetting projects, building ethical investment protocols, and moving billions of dollars out of abstract markets and into tangible, life-altering initiatives around the globe. The Sterling Restoration Foundation was no longer just a title on a document. It was a living, breathing entity. It was my answer to everything that had come before, and now, for the first time since I'd fled my family's ruin, I was back in Boston. The city air was thick with history, but for the first time it didn't feel like it was choking me. I was not the runaway daughter returning in shame. I was here on my own terms, the formidable head of a foundation that could buy and sell the world my parents had lost 100 times over. I had arranged to meet them in a neutral space, a bench in the Boston Public Garden overlooking the swan boats. It was a place of quiet public grace. I saw them before they saw me. My father Declan looked older than his years, his shoulders stooped with a weight that was more than just age. My mother Eleanor was as rigid as ever, her posture a fortress against a world that had disappointed her. They looked fragile. I walked up to them, and they both started not having noticed my approach. "Kaya," my father breathed, his voice thick with a mix of shock and something I couldn't name. "Hello, Dad." "Mom," I said, my voice calm. I didn't hug them. I didn't sit down. I remained standing, a quiet assertion of the new dynamic between us. "Thank you for coming." I didn't waste time on small talk. I handed my father a slim manila folder. "I think you need to see this," I said. With trembling hands, he opened it. Inside was a full notarized transcript of Elias's recorded conversation with Julian, along with supporting financial documents that showed in stark, undeniable detail how Julian had systematically defrauded them. It was the truth of his betrayal, laid bare on paper. I watched my father's eyes scan the pages. His face, already etched with the lines of old grief, seemed to crumble. A single silent tear tracked down his cheek, then another. It was not a cry of new pain, but of a 15-year-old wound that was finally horribly being lanced. He was seeing the proof that he wasn't a failure. He was a victim. My mother refused to look at the documents. She stared straight ahead at the placid pond, her face a mask of stone. To accept this truth would be to admit her own blindness, to admit she had sided with the architect of her own husband's destruction. It was a truth too terrible for her to bear. "Julian is facing multiple lawsuits from other investors now." I stated my voice even without malice. "He and Sarah have separated. The world you chose to believe in, it was a lie." I then placed a second folder on the bench beside my mother. "This is an offer," I said. "The foundation has set up a lifetime annuity for both of you. It's enough to live comfortably with dignity. It will also pay for counseling for you, Dad, and for both of you together if you choose. The only condition is that you completely sever all ties with Julian. You have to choose to leave the lie behind." I looked at them one last time, my broken father, my stone-faced mother. "It's not a bailout," I said softly. "It's a lifeline to a life of truth. The choice is yours." I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and walked away, the scent of late spring flowers following me. I could only offer them the door. I could not make them walk through it. The next day I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. "It's Sarah. Can we talk?" We met at a small, anonymous coffee shop in the South End, far from the gleaming towers of the financial district. I arrived first. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. The designer suit was gone, replaced by simple jeans and a plain gray sweater. Her hair was down, falling naturally around her shoulders. She wore no makeup. The fierce, arrogant ambition in her eyes had been replaced by a deep, hollowed-out exhaustion. She looked like a stranger, a tired, sad stranger. She sat down opposite me, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup as if for warmth. She didn't meet my eyes. For a long moment we just sat in silence. Finally she looked up, her gaze direct for the first time. Her voice was quiet, stripped of all its former artifice. "Why?" she asked. Just one word. It held everything. I took a breath. This was the one question that truly mattered. "Because you erased me, Sarah," I said, my own voice just as quiet. "You all did." From the moment Dad's business failed, I became an inconvenience. My ideas, my passions for science and the earth, They were treated as childish worthless. I wasn't just the other daughter. I was the lesser daughter, the failure. I leaned forward. The withdrawal from your bank, that wasn't a punishment, not really. It was an act of self-retrieval. I had to take all the energy, all the belief, all the hope and worth I had invested in my family, in you for years, and I had to take it all back. Because you were bankrupting me in ways that have nothing to do with money. She listened, her eyes welling up with tears she didn't bother to wipe away. She nodded slowly, accepting the truth of my words without. I blinked, the memory of that sad cafe in Boston fading. Jealous of me, I asked the idea so foreign it felt like a language I didn't speak. Yes, Sarah whispered, a tear finally tracing a path through the exhaustion on her face. You were free. You walked away and built a life that was real. You didn't have to perform for anyone. I built a cage, Kaya, a beautiful, expensive cage, and I was so tired of living in it. She took a shaky breath, her gaze finally truly meeting mine. I'm sorry, Kaya, for everything. I am so sorry. It wasn't an eloquent apology. It was broken and humble, and for the first time in 15 years, it was true. I looked at my sister, this stranger who shared my blood, and I didn't feel the urge to say, I forgive you. Forgiveness, I was learning, isn't a word you grant like a pardon. It's a quiet space you build inside yourself, a room where you can leave the old hurts to rest so they no longer have the power to poison your present. I simply nodded. I hope you find a way to build something real this time, Sarah. I told her, my voice gentle. For yourself. I stood, left a $20 bill on the table for our coffees, and walked out into the Boston sunlight, feeling not victorious or vindicated, but free. The final heavy chain to my past had not been broken in anger, but had simply dissolved in the light of a quiet, painful truth. 1 year later, I am back in Denver. I am not in a sterile bank or an opulent hotel suite. I am standing in the middle of 2 acres of vibrant, thriving life, the warm Colorado sun on my face. The air here doesn't smell of ozone or leather. It smells of rich, dark soil, of tomato vines and basil, and of the faint, sweet scent of marigolds planted to keep the pests away. This is the 5 Points Community Agricultural Center, the flagship project of the Sterling Restoration Foundation. It is the fully realized, magnificent version of Mateo's struggling garden. Gleaming greenhouses stand against the sharp blue of the sky, extending the growing season through the cold Denver winters. Children's laughter rings out from a section where a class is learning about pollinators. Families are scattered throughout the rows, harvesting baskets of fresh vegetables produced they can take home for free. This isn't a charity pit. It is a system, a place of growth, community, and restoration. A familiar figure walks toward me, his face weathered by the sun, his smile wide and genuine. Mateo. He is the director here now, a brilliant and passionate leader. He gives me a warm, respectful hug. There is no gushing gratitude between us anymore. That has long since evolved into a partnership of deep mutual respect. Look at this, Kaya, he says, his voice thick with a pride that I feel in my own chest. 150 families got their produce from us last week. 150. And the youth program, we have a waiting list. No, Mateo, I say, smiling back at him. Look what we built. As I walk through the paths, my boots now covered in the same rich dirt I am so fond of, I let my mind drift over the past year. The ripples of my actions have finally found their shores. I got a letter from my father last week from the small cottage he has rented by the sea in Maine. His handwriting is stronger now. He told me he's been working with a therapist to unpack 15 years of misplaced shame. He's started tinkering with engineering designs again just for himself. He is slowly, painfully rebuilding his life on a foundation of truth. My mother, he wrote, has started joining him for his therapy sessions, a small, fragile but hopeful beginning. Elias informed me that Sarah moved to a quiet town in Vermont. She took a simple administrative job at the local library. The last he heard, she was volunteering on weekends at an animal shelter. I hope she has found a way to build something real. As for Julian, his name only appears in legal filings, now a ghost of a man being sued into oblivion by a dozen other families he ruined. He is a problem for lawyers and courts, no longer for me. I stop and watch a young mother showing her daughter how to test a melon for ripeness, and I realize with a profound sense of peace that the greatest asset I withdrew that day in Denver was not the $3.5 billion. That was just the tool. The real withdrawal was my own heart, my loyalty, my emotional energy, my sense of self-worth. I stopped investing it all in the toxic soil of my family's approval and replanted it here in a place where things could actually grow. A little girl no older than 5 lets out a squeal of pure, unadulterated triumph. She holds up a gnarled, bright orange carrot she has just wrestled from the earth, her face a perfect mask of joyous accomplishment. She runs to her father shouting, "Daddy, look what I did!" I watch them, and a quiet, deep smile finds its way to my lips. This is the ROI I was talking about. This is the legacy. Not a name on a building, but the taste of a fresh carrot in the mouth of a happy child. My sister once mocked me for $100 needed for a water pump. Now the foundation in my name helps fund water projects that serve thousands. Some fortunes are measured in dollars in stock prices and acquisitions. Mine is measured in the harvest, and it is richer than they could ever imagine. So that's the story. That's how a quiet request for $100 ended up moving billions. It sounds like a revenge fantasy, I know. The kind of story you tell yourself when you feel powerless. But looking back on it all now from here, from a place of peace, I can tell you the numbers on the screen were the least important part of the entire journey. The lesson I learned wasn't about finance or power dynamics. It was about value. For years, I had allowed my family to set my worth. In their eyes, I was a failed investment, a forgotten asset. And the most dangerous part is that a small piece of me started to believe them. The most important withdrawal you will ever make in your life is pulling your own sense of self-worth out of the hands of people who devalue it. You have to stop depositing your hope in a bankrupt account. That was my real withdrawal. It wasn't just taking my money out of their bank, it was taking my heart, my future, and my identity out of their story. They had a narrative written for me, the quiet one, the strange one, the failure. And I think many of us have roles that other people, even people who love us, try to make us play. The responsible one, the wild one, the one who never measures up. But the thing about stories is, you are always allowed to pick up the pen and write a different ending for yourself. It's terrifying, but it's the only way to truly live. It makes me wonder, have you ever felt like you were cast in a role that just wasn't you? What does real success, real wealth even look like? Is it the title on a business card and the view from a top-floor office? Or is it the quiet satisfaction of knowing you are living a life that is honest and true and entirely your own? I don't have all the answers, but I've come to believe this. The world may judge you by the noise you make, but your legacy is built in the silence of your convictions. If this story made you think, or if it resonated with that quiet part of you that knows your own value, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you see it differently or have a story of your own, please share it. The most powerful lessons come from continuing the conversation. And if you appreciate stories about finding strength in quiet places, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That way you won't miss the next story we share together. Thank you for listening. Be good to yourselves.